Ever since that was revealed, the NSA keeps a record of nearly every telephone call in America. One question has persisted. What's the actual harm? Well, now an unlikely coalition of political groups is challenging that surveillance of First Amendment grounds, saying it violates their right to free speech. As America Tonight's Michael Oku found out, their concerns aren't as far-fetched as they sound.
Mention the words gun enthusiast, and Gene Hoffman is probably not the first person that comes to mind. A Silicon Valley entrepreneur, his tastes run more to cotton Oxford over camouflage, more to Mercedes than Ford pickups. Nonetheless, Hoffman's passion for guns runs deep.
Do not stop or hesitate at the shooting stations.
So much so that he spent part of his fortune founding the Cowguns Foundation, an organization that advocates on behalf of gun owners.
Well, Silicon Valley's a little interesting in that, you have a lot of engineers and tinkerers and hardware folks, and, firearms flow very naturally out of that kind of maker culture.
So if I own a gun in Silicon Valley, it doesn't say anything else about me other than the fact that I have a gun.
No, in fact, our organization is a pretty middle-of-the-road organization. We march with the Pink Pistols at the Gay Pride Parade. I've got as many people who are for owning AR-15s and Obamacare as are against it.
While Hoffman and his group may be surprising, one thing isn't. He believes his rights and those of his members are under assault from the federal government. But instead of that threat coming from their traditional foes in Washington, he says it's from a new source, the National Security Agency.
Many of the objections to NSA's surveillance programs have been based on principle. But have those programs already had a real impact on the lives of ordinary Americans? Well, Gene Hoffman and others here in the Bay Area say yes.
What worries Hoffman most is that NSA program which keeps records of nearly every phone call made in the United States. Hoffman's group runs a telephone hotline which provides legal advice to gun owners who fear they may be afoul of the law.
I need people to be confident that they can join my organization, and the fact that there's a record being kept of who's in my group and who's not in my group, indirectly but effectively enough, is very chilling to our membership. I know that I have users not contacting me because they're afraid.
Can you quantify this? Is it, 15% of your membership? Is it 20%, 30%?
But in some ways it doesn't matter how many members it is.
Is it dozens of people? Is it scores of people?
But once it's one person, it's unconstitutional.
One
right?
person is
One
enough.
person, yeah, because that person hasn't been able to express their political activism. Those people's speech, their right to assemble, has absolutely been chilled.
That argument, that the NSA's surveillance of Americans is illegal on First Amendment grounds, is a novel one. But it's also an approach that's gaining wider acceptance. Hoffman's group recently joined 21 politically active organizations in filing a lawsuit against the NSA, arguing the agency's activities violate their right to free speech. The list of plaintiffs is as diverse as the Bay Area itself, ranging from the Unitarian Church to pro-marijuana groups.
What happens when people feel like they're watched all the time? They don't have the conversation. They don't organize. They don't join a political group.
Cindy Cohen is the legal director of the Electronic Frontier Foundation, an organization that fights for free speech and privacy rights. The EFF is the legal team behind the lawsuit.
Mass spying is illegal, unconstitutional, and extremely dangerous if you care about freedom. It puts you at the mercy of just hoping that you've got a benevolent government that won't target you and that won't get in the way of democratic organizing or political organizing that it disfavors.
I can imagine that some people listening, it conjures for them images of free-loving lawyers in San Francisco, hunkering over a table discussing government conspiracies. Are you being paranoid?
No, I'm not paranoid. I'm a Midwestern girl from the middle of Iowa. I wonder how much of this stuff is funded through the NSA's budget.
Cohen believes she's got a good case, not least because in the 1950s, the Supreme Court did recognize the effect government surveillance can have on free speech.
The U.S. Supreme Court held that the NAACP didn't have to turn over their membership lists to the government. And the Supreme Court said, you know, people aren't going to join the NAACP if they know that the fact of their membership is going to be turned over to the government. It's going to create a chilling effect. And what we're doing in this case is really the digital version of that, because who you talk to on the phone, how long you talk to them, how often you talk to them, well, those are your associations.
One group that's joined the lawsuit has actually dealt with government spying firsthand. Zahra Billoo is the executive director of the Bay Area office of the Council on American-Islamic Relations.
Learning that the NSA was gathering intelligence data, particularly the phone records of U.S. residents, was not surprising because it was something that many members of the Muslim community had experienced in sort of smaller settings.
In 2004, the FBI, which works closely with the NSA, began spying on Muslims in the Bay Area, passing that information along to intelligence officials. Billoo learned about all this through a information request.
This is a stack of documents, and it's only an excerpt, but a couple of years ago...
That's a lot of surveillance.
And this is just a portion of it. This is just a small portion of it, right? This is what I could print without running out of paper. These are ordinary events, and I go to the mosque multiple times a week. And so to think that at any given day or at any given event, there could have been an FBI agent there taking down notes and putting those notes in intelligence files is really frightening.
So what came out of this surveillance? Were any of these members hardened criminals? Were they involved in organized crime, terrorist activity?
Right. Nothing at all. We hear from American Muslims who are saying, I am afraid to practice my religion. I'm afraid to go to the mosque and become politically involved. We are hearing from people who say, you know, we left our countries to escape government surveillance, right? When we were in Syria, when we were in Egypt, it was normal to believe that the walls had eyes and ears. We left our countries to escape that, and now you're telling us that we're not safe in our community centers, and we're not safe amongst friends.
It's not overstating it to say that people in your community are living in a climate of fear.
I think that would be an appropriate statement. That would be an accurate representation. People are living in a state of fear.
We asked the Justice Department, which is defending the government, for an interview. It declined. However, in an interview earlier this year about the telephone data program, James Clapper, the Director of National Intelligence, said he cares very deeply about our privacy and civil liberties, adding, I think a lot of what people are reading and seeing in the media is hyperbole. The concerns over NSA spying don't end with the fact that private information is being stored in a database. There's also concern about how that information is actually being used. Those fears were heightened when it was recently revealed that the NSA has been turning over information to domestic law enforcement agencies. John Schiffman is a reporter from Reuters News who broke the story.
The information that the NSA provides to law enforcement, they send it to a place called the Special Operations Division, which is in Virginia. And that operation sends the evidence out to the DEA, to the IRS, to the ATF, the FBI, and they use that information to make cases against Americans in non-terrorism cases.
Like most everything involving the NSA, the Special Operations Division is cloaked in secrecy. According to one document obtained by Reuters, it strictly forbids those who receive NSA information from revealing its true source. Schiffman describes one scenario.
The NSA will pass the information on to the DEA, which will pass it on to local authorities, and they will pull the person over on the pretext, say a person didn't signal correctly to change lanes or their taillight is out. And lo and behold, they'll find drugs in the trunk. The person who's arrested thinks that the DEA just got lucky, when in fact they got a whisper from the NSA or the CIA.
We hear from defense attorneys who are now saying, you know, I think there was something funny in that prosecution of my client. They were able to magically learn this information about his communications, and I don't know, but I wonder if the NSA surveillance was behind it.
According to Gene Hoffman, the fear of overzealous or even wrongful prosecution is just one more thing that's driving people away from political groups like his.
Well, the Cal Guns Foundation runs a hotline, and you've got a question about the AR-15 you owned in New York. and whether or not it's legal in California. It's a really frightening thing for especially a gun owner in California to know that there's a record of him reaching out to the legal defense hotline of the Cal Guns Foundation to ask a question about whether he's a felon or not.
I don't think that the invocation of national security means that we throw out all of the values of how to run a right society, how to have due process, constitutional democracy, and how to run a country. We don't have a national security exception to our Constitution in this